You know, there's something deeply tragic, almost mythological, about the moment a narcissist realizes they've lost someone powerful. It's not merely a breakup or the end of a relationship. No, it's a reckoning, a collapse of a carefully constructed illusion. And that's important to understand because narcissism, true narcissism, isn't just about vanity. It's a pathological reliance on control, on manipulation, on the distortion of reality to preserve a fragile, false self. And so when someone powerful, someone with integrity, with boundaries, with strength forged in suffering, finally walks away, that illusion begins to crack. And for the narcissist, that's terrifying. It's like the dragon discovering that the knight it thought it could devour was actually breathing fire of its own. That's the moment the predator realizes it misjudged the prey. And what's worse for the narcissist is that this loss isn't just personal, it's existential. Because in losing that powerful individual, they're also forced, often for the first time, to confront the hollowness within themselves. And that is unbearable. But it is in that confrontation, if it even happens, that the seeds of transformation can be sown, though, let's be honest, most will never plant them. The narcissist's false self begins to fracture when true power walks away. This is a moment that they neither expect nor can easily recover from. Narcissism at its core is a defense mechanism, an intricate web of lies, manipulations, and grandiose beliefs meant to shield an individual from the terrifying truth of their own inadequacy. This defense is built on a fragile foundation, one that relies heavily on control, dominance, and the continual validation of others. To the narcissist, the world is a stage and they are the lead actor. They need the audience's approval to maintain their sense of self. When someone of true power, someone who is grounded in their own identity, confident in their boundaries, and deeply aware of their own value, enters the narcissist's orbit, things shift. This powerful individual doesn't feed into the narcissist's need for constant affirmation. Instead, they offer something far more dangerous, the reality of what it means to stand firm in one's own identity, free from the distortions of insecurity and the need for external validation. The narcissist, usually accustomed to bending people to their will, can't quite figure out how to control someone like this. They might initially try their usual tactics, charm, manipulation, guilt tripping, or even outright emotional abuse. But these strategies fall flat in the face of someone who is self-assured. When the narcissist realizes that their usual methods won't work, they face an uncomfortable truth. They cannot exert the control they once took for granted, and in this realization, something cracks inside them. This is not an immediate, obvious breakdown. At first, the narcissist might attempt to double down. They may escalate their efforts to manipulate or trap the powerful individual emotionally. However, there comes a moment when the narcissist feels that grip slip. It's when the other person simply refuses to engage in the dance. Their silence is impenetrable, their stance unwavering. For the narcissist, this is a devastating realization. They are no longer in control, and they are in fact powerless in the face of someone who knows exactly who they are. It's in these moments that the narcissist experiences a deep dissonance. On one level, they know that they've lost someone who was valuable, someone who, despite their faults, was a real person with strength and worth. But on another level, they cannot reconcile the fact that their usual tactics of manipulation, charm, or intimidation have failed. Their entire worldview, which depends on their ability to distort reality and bend others to their will, is suddenly rendered useless. The narcissist's carefully constructed sense of superiority starts to unravel. They can no longer maintain the facade of control, and it shakes them to their core. Now, in many cases, this realization doesn't come immediately. The narcissist might be in denial, refusing to acknowledge that they've lost someone powerful until the situation is completely beyond repair. But even in that denial, a seed is planted. There's a nagging sense in the back of their mind that the person they've lost was someone who could never truly be controlled. And that knowledge, the awareness that they could not break or dominate this individual, haunts them. The pain of this moment goes far beyond the typical heartbreak one might expect from losing a partner or friend. For the narcissist, it's not just about love or the end of a relationship. It's about the collapse of a false narrative, a narrative they've crafted over the course of their life to avoid confronting their own worthlessness. They have now encountered someone who sees through that narrative, someone who doesn't need them, doesn't want to be controlled, and can stand independently without them. The narcissist world becomes destabilized, and that instability is a deeply uncomfortable place to be. In this process, the narcissist is forced to reckon with something they've spent their entire life avoiding, the truth about who they really are, when they can no longer manipulate or control others. And that truth is often far too much to bear. In many ways, the narcissist's entire identity is built on the illusion that they are superior to others, powerful, untouchable, and always in control. But when they lose someone who is immune to their tactics, that illusion shatters, and with it, their entire sense of self begins to fall apart. This moment, the moment when a narcissist realizes they've lost someone powerful, is a turning point. It is a juncture between the preservation of their false self and the possibility of facing reality. But for most narcissists, the pull to maintain their illusion is so strong that they will never truly allow themselves to confront the full weight of their loss. They will retreat into denial, further entrenching themselves in their own delusions, always seeking new victims to maintain their facade. But for those who do confront this moment with honesty, who acknowledge the emptiness they've been hiding from, it can be the beginning of a painful yet potentially transformative journey. Control is their currency, and losing it triggers existential panic. For the narcissist, the world is a game of power dynamics, and they are the undisputed rulers of that game. Everything revolves around their ability to dominate, manipulate, and ultimately control the people and circumstances around them. It's not about love, affection, or even respect. It's about maintaining control over their environment and the individuals within it. This need for control is rooted in an overwhelming fear of vulnerability and weakness, things they have spent their entire lives trying to suppress or deny. When this control slips away, it's not just a personal setback. It's a complete unraveling of their carefully constructed identity. The narcissist's sense of self-worth is intrinsically tied to their ability to control others. They need to feel superior always. The need for validation isn't driven by a deep desire for affection or genuine connection. It's about reinforcing their own sense of power and importance. Without the adoration, manipulation, and influence over others, the narcissist risks confronting the abyss of their own insecurities. This insecurity is a fundamental aspect of their psychological makeup. They are deeply aware, whether consciously or subconsciously, that beneath the surface of their inflated ego lies a hollow, fragile self. If they lose control, they face the terrifying possibility that the facade they've spent years perfecting will come crashing down, exposing them for who they really are. This fear is so profound that it triggers an existential panic when someone powerful, someone who isn't susceptible to their manipulations, removes themselves from the narcissist orbit. It's not just a betrayal of trust, nor is it merely the loss of a relationship. It's the collapse of a core aspect of the narcissist's identity. The moment they realize they no longer hold dominion over the person, when they understand that they can't manipulate or control them, it's as if they lose their footing in the world itself. The ground beneath them trembles because they've built their entire existence on the ability to control. The realization that this control is gone brings with it a deep primal fear. What are they without control? This panic isn't just emotional, it's existential. It's as though the narcissist's sense of being begins to fracture. Without the people they can control or manipulate, the narcissist is faced with the possibility that they might not even exist in the way they thought. They've never had to experience life without this form of dominance, and now they're forced to confront a void. This is when the narcissist becomes unmoored. The panic they feel isn't just about the loss of the person, but about the loss of the thing that held their world together: control. This fear can manifest in many ways, from anger to desperation to pathological manipulation. They might lash out at the person they've lost, blaming them for the collapse of their world. They may attempt to reassert control, but more often than not, the narcissist's desperation becomes obvious to those around them. The strategies they once used to maintain their power no longer work, and this only deepens their panic. The more they attempt to regain control, the more they expose themselves as fragile and vulnerable. In this state, they often turn to passive-aggressive tactics, emotional blackmail, or even gaslighting, anything to keep their grip on the situation. But these attempts are often transparently desperate, and as a result, they tend to accelerate the loss of control rather than restore it. The existential panic the narcissist experiences also stems from their deep awareness that their very survival is threatened when they lose control. This isn't just a fear of losing a person or a relationship. It's a fear of losing their entire sense of self. The narcissist doesn't know how to exist in a world where they aren't the one pulling the strings. They don't know how to interact with people on equal terms because for them, relationships are always a means of gaining power, not connection. To be without that power is to be exposed, vulnerable, and raw in a way that is intolerable to the narcissistic psyche. At its core, the narcissist's entire life has been a performance. They are constantly trying to project an image of superiority, confidence, and dominance, things they don't actually feel internally. This projection becomes the armor they wear to defend themselves against the world and against the crushing self-doubt that constantly threatens to surface. When control slips away, it's not just the loss of someone, it's the collapse of the very persona they've spent years constructing. And without that persona, they are faced with an identity crisis that they are often too fragile to face head on. The panic that accompanies this loss of control is overwhelming, and it drives the narcissist to extremes. They may feel a profound sense of emptiness or insignificance, as though they have no purpose or meaning without the people they control. This realization is not something they can easily accept, and it is often so threatening to their sense of self that they will do almost anything to restore the control they've lost. But the damage has already been done. Once the narcissist realizes that they have lost someone who cannot be controlled, they enter a psychological space from which they may never fully recover. They underestimate strength disguised as empathy and patience. Narcissists have a fundamental misunderstanding of what true power looks like. To them, strength is often synonymous with dominance, aggression, and the ability to control. Their world is shaped by the belief that power is best exerted through force, through manipulation, coercion, and the continual testing of others' boundaries. They mistake outward assertiveness and outward success as the truest forms of strength, assuming that anyone who is not outwardly assertive or dominating is weak, passive, or easily manipulated. However, what the narcissist fails to recognize is that there is an entirely different kind of power, one that is quiet, subtle, and unshakable. This is the strength of someone who is deeply rooted in their own sense of self, who knows their own worth and doesn't need to assert it constantly. This is the power of empathy, patience, and emotional intelligence. It's the ability to stand firm in the face of adversity without resorting to manipulative tactics or emotional violence. It's the kind of strength that doesn't scream for attention but quietly commands respect. The narcissist will often see this kind of power as a weakness because it doesn't conform to their worldview. To them, anyone who doesn't engage in the same game of control is somehow less powerful. They may even mock or dismiss individuals who demonstrate this strength, seeing them as naive, too soft, or even too nice. They believe that the ability to be patient or empathetic is a sign of fragility because it doesn't directly demand dominance over others. They fail to realize, however, that empathy is not the absence of strength. It is the presence of a far deeper and more enduring form of it. What the narcissist overlooks is that true power does not need to impose itself upon others to validate its existence. Someone who understands and respects their own boundaries, someone who doesn't engage in the narcissist's games, is often far more powerful than the narcissist realizes. This is the person who has mastered the art of emotional detachment, who doesn't allow the manipulations of others to sway their sense of self. It is the person who can love deeply, but not at the cost of their own integrity. This is not a passive individual, but one who is secure enough in themselves to walk away from toxicity without looking back. Short sales. Narcissists are often so blinded by their need to control that they can't see this strength for what it is. To them, empathy is weakness, patience is stagnation, and emotional maturity is an illusion. They confuse the ability to stay calm and composed with a lack of passion or conviction. They fail to realize that someone who can navigate relationships with care, who can patiently observe and understand others, and who can maintain their own center despite the chaos around them, possesses an extraordinary amount of inner strength. It is this strength that ultimately makes the difference in the narcissist world. When someone of this nature enters their life, the narcissist is unable to manipulate them in the same way they manipulate others. This individual doesn't need to be loud or brash to assert their power. They simply exist with a quiet, unwavering presence that is grounded in their authenticity. The narcissist might try to engage in their usual tactics, but the lack of response, the lack of vulnerability to their games leaves them bewildered. They are left with no choice but to see the true strength of the other person, something that goes far beyond their own shallow understanding of power. The narcissist, used to dominating their relationships with charm, guilt, or even cruelty, is blindsided by this strength. They don't know how to respond when they encounter someone who can stand up to them without resorting to aggression, who can recognize their manipulations and walk away without engaging in the drama. This kind of strength isn't something the narcissist can easily control, and that is what makes it so terrifying. It exposes the narcissist for what they truly are, someone whose sense of self is fragile, who needs to constantly manipulate and control others to maintain their sense of power. What the narcissist fails to understand is that true power is not about control, it's about choice. The ability to choose one's actions, one's boundaries, and one's relationships without being swayed by external pressures is the essence of real strength. It's the ability to remain composed, to stay true to one's values, and to navigate the world with integrity without compromising one's sense of self. This is a strength that doesn't need to be displayed or flaunted. It is silent, steadfast, and invulnerable to manipulation. And when the narcissist encounters this strength, they can't help but feel threatened. They've spent their lives convincing themselves that their power lies in their ability to dominate, to control, to bend others to their will. But the person who stands firm, who does not need to control or manipulate, reveals a deeper truth to them, one that they are unwilling or unable to face. It's this truth that ultimately strips the narcissist of their illusions and forces them to confront the limits of their own power. The loss confronts them with a mirror they've avoided their whole life. For a narcissist, their entire existence is a careful construction designed to shield them from the harsh truth of who they really are. They spend their lives crafting a facade, an inflated self-immunity that is often built on lies, manipulation, and a warped sense of superiority. This false self is a defense mechanism, a mask they wear to protect themselves from the crushing sense of inadequacy and vulnerability they feel deep inside. They cannot afford to confront the truth of their own fragility, because doing so would shatter the carefully maintained illusion of power and control they've worked so hard to create. This illusion is what keeps them going, what allows them to navigate the world without succumbing to despair. When someone powerful walks away from their life, this carefully constructed reality begins to crumble. It's not just the loss of a person. It's the loss of the very thing that has sustained their false self, control. And when that control is gone, the narcissist is forced to face something they've spent their entire life avoiding, the reality of who they really are when they are not in control, when they are no longer the center of attention, when they can no longer rely on their usual tactics to dominate the people around them. This is when the narcissist is confronted with the mirror. The person they've lost was someone who could see through the facade, someone who didn't buy into their illusions. And that in itself is a wake-up call. It's not just the end of a relationship, it's the collapse of the narrative they've been telling themselves about who they are. The narcissist has spent so long projecting an image of strength, power, and superiority that they've forgotten what it means to be vulnerable. They've spent so long demanding admiration and validation from others that they've lost touch with their own authenticity. The loss of someone powerful forces them to confront the possibility that they are not, in fact, the all-powerful, untouchable figure they believe themselves to be. This confrontation with their own reflection is not a comfortable one. For most narcissists, it's excruciating. The pain of seeing themselves for who they truly are, broken, insecure, and fragile, is almost unbearable. They may react with anger, deflecting any responsibility and blaming the other person for their pain. But beneath that anger is a deep sense of fear and shame. The narcissist fears that if they truly face who they are, they will lose everything. They will lose the power they've so desperately clung to, and they will have to confront the truth of their own emptiness. This truth is so threatening that many narcissists will do anything to avoid it. They will distract themselves with new relationships, new conquests, or new achievements in a desperate attempt to fill the void left by the person they've lost. They may seek out new sources of validation. But no matter how much they try to fill that emptiness, they will always come up short. The reason is simple. The void they are trying to fill is not external, it is internal. It's the emptiness that comes from having built a life around a false self, a life that is sustained by control and manipulation but lacks genuine connection or authenticity. For some narcissists, this confrontation with the mirror might trigger a moment of introspection, a brief flash of self-awareness where they realize the depth of their own damage. But this moment is fleeting, and most will quickly retreat into denial, distracting themselves with their usual strategies of manipulation and control. They will try to rebuild their false self, to construct a new narrative that allows them to avoid facing the truth of who they are. They may even convince themselves that they never needed the person they lost, that they are better off without them. But deep down, they know this is not true. They know that the loss of someone powerful is not just the loss of a person, but the loss of a reflection of their own inner void, a reflection they can no longer escape from. The narcissist's relationship with the mirror is complex. On one hand, they are terrified of what they might see, but on the other hand, they are drawn to the truth it represents. They cannot fully escape from the reflection of who they are, and as much as they try to run from it, it will always be there. This is why the moment they realize they've lost someone powerful is so crucial. It is the moment that forces them to face their own humanity, their own imperfections, and their own vulnerability. And while they may try to avoid this truth, it will continue to haunt them. It's not a lesson they can easily forget, no matter how hard they try. Ultimately, this moment of confrontation with the mirror is a crossroads for the narcissist. It's a chance, though rarely seized, to rebuild their life in a more authentic way, to acknowledge their shortcomings and start the painful process of self-repair. But for most narcissists, the mirror remains a terrifying place they would rather avoid, and they will continue to retreat into their illusions, never fully able to face the truth of who they are. Regret isn't about love. It's about losing supply and dominance. For a narcissist, emotions like love, empathy, or affection are often secondary to their need for power, validation, and control. Narcissism, at its core, is about the manipulation of others to sustain the narcissist's inflated sense of self. A narcissist doesn't form relationships based on genuine emotional connection. They seek out individuals who can serve as supplies, people who provide the admiration, validation, or resources that bolster their self-position. These people are not seen as equals or companions, but as tools, objects to be used for the narcissist's benefit. So when a narcissist loses someone powerful, The regret they feel is not the kind of regret that comes from a deep emotional connection or love for the person they've lost. Instead, their regret is rooted in the loss of the supply that the individual provided. It's the loss of someone who validated their sense of self, someone who offered them the attention, admiration, or support they craved. It's not about missing the person as a whole, it's about missing the function they served in the narcissist's life. The narcissist is often incapable of truly understanding or experiencing love as others do. They may think they love someone, but in reality, what they are feeling is an attachment to the power that person provides them, the admiration, the compliance, the sense of superiority they get from having someone submit to their will. These are the things that the narcissist craves. When someone powerful walks away, they aren't left mourning the loss of an emotional connection. Instead, they are faced with the loss of a critical resource that they relied on to maintain their illusion of greatness. This is why the narcissist's regret often feels hollow. It's not about genuine sorrow or remorse. It's a primal reaction to the loss of their perceived control over the other person. They regret losing someone who gave them the fuel they needed to keep their false self afloat. This isn't to say that narcissists don't experience pain when someone walks away from them. They do, but the pain they feel is less about the emotional bond and more about the fear of losing their ability to dominate, control, and manipulate. Their world revolves around power dynamics, and without their supply, their sense of self begins to wither. When a narcissist loses someone powerful, they can feel vulnerable in a way they haven't felt before. For the first time, they are confronted with the reality that their identity is not invincible. They may react with anger or frustration, not because they are devastated by the loss, but because their sense of control has been disrupted. They might try to rationalize the loss, convince themselves that they are better off without that person, or even attempt to move on quickly by finding a new supply. But none of these responses address the root of their regret, the realization that they are no longer in control and that they are unable to manipulate or dominate the person who has walked away. What's more, the narcissist's regret can be incredibly self-centered. Instead of recognizing their own toxic behavior or how they contributed to the demise of the relationship, they will often blame the other person for abandoning them or betraying them. They might even portray themselves as the victim, casting the individual who left as the villain in their narrative. This is an attempt to regain control of the situation and avoid confronting the uncomfortable truth that their actions, manipulation, gaslighting, emotional abuse, are what led to the breakdown of the relationship. This sense of entitlement, this belief that others exist to serve their needs, makes the narcissist's regret even more complicated. They feel entitled to the admiration, love, and attention they receive from their supply. When that supply is no longer available, it can trigger feelings of deprivation, but these feelings are rooted in their belief that they deserve to have others meet their needs at all costs. The narcissist is often blind to the fact that they have drained their source of supply through their selfishness and manipulative tactics. Instead of recognizing the imbalance in the relationship, they see themselves as the one who has been wronged, further perpetuating the cycle of entitlement and victimhood. It's important to recognize that the narcissist's regret does not typically lead to personal growth or self-reflection. It is unlikely that they will ever take responsibility for their actions or learn from the experience. Instead, their regret is usually about finding a way to restore the power dynamic they lost. They may seek out another source of supply to fill the void, but this cycle of using others to prop up their self-impunity will continue as long as they refuse to acknowledge the deeper emotional void they are trying to fill. The narcissist's relationship with regret is marked by selfishness and an inability to experience genuine emotional depth. They are not capable of truly loving others in a way that fosters mutual respect and connection. For them, relationships are transactional. People are either assets to be used or obstacles to be controlled. When they lose someone powerful, The regret they feel is an echo of their broken sense of self, not a true loss of love. It is a manifestation of their desperate need to maintain control over their world, and when that control slips away, they are left with nothing but the hollow shell of their own ego. The need to rewrite the narrative of their defeat drives them to distort reality. For the narcissist, defeat is not just a personal loss, it is a direct assault on their carefully constructed identity. Narcissists are deeply invested in the story they tell themselves and others about who they are: powerful, unshakable, superior, and above all, in control. They have spent years, if not a lifetime, building an image that allows them to navigate the world with a sense of invincibility. The idea of losing someone powerful, someone who no longer serves as a source of validation or supply, is a threat to this narrative, a narrative that sustains their fragile self-esteem. When confronted with the reality of their defeat, the narcissist cannot simply accept the loss. To do so would be to face the terrifying possibility that their entire existence, the story they have told themselves for years, is nothing but a facade. This is something they cannot afford. Instead of accepting the truth, they will go to great lengths to rewrite the narrative, to distort reality in a way that allows them to maintain the illusion of superiority and control. One of the most common tactics the narcissist will use to rewrite the narrative is to shift blame. They will tell themselves and anyone who will listen that they were the victim in the situation. They may accuse the person who left them of betrayal, disloyalty, or some other perceived injustice. In doing so, they absolve themselves of any responsibility for the collapse of the relationship. The narcissist will twist the facts, exaggerate the other person's faults, and create a version of events that paints them as the wronged party. By doing this, they are able to retain their sense of superiority, because in their distorted version of reality, they are the hero and the other person is the villain. Another way the narcissist rewrites the narrative is by minimizing the significance of the loss. They may convince themselves that they didn't really need the person they lost, or that they are better off without them. This form of denial is a defense mechanism, a way to protect themselves from the pain of facing the truth. If the narcissist can convince themselves that the loss is insignificant, they can avoid feeling the vulnerability and inadequacy that would otherwise arise from confronting the truth of their own defeat. They may dismiss the relationship as something trivial or inconsequential, telling themselves that they never truly cared for the person in the first place. This minimizes the emotional impact and allows them to maintain the illusion of invulnerability. At times, the narcissist may even try to rewrite the narrative by engaging in a campaign of character assassination. They will speak ill of the person they lost, trying to tarnish their reputation and destroy the credibility of anyone who might support them. This is done not out of genuine malice, but out of a deep fear of losing control. If the narcissist can successfully turn others against the person they lost, they regain a sense of power. It allows them to avoid facing the discomfort of acknowledging their own weaknesses or the role they played in the failure of the relationship. These tactics, however, are not without consequences. The more the narcissist distorts reality, the more they alienate themselves from those around them. People who once admired them may begin to see through the lies and manipulation. As the narcissist narrative becomes more inconsistent and exaggerated, it becomes harder for others to buy into their version of events. The narcissist's ability to control the perception of reality diminishes as the cracks in their facade start to show. Their desperate need to rewrite the narrative may even backfire, leading to further isolation and the erosion of the power they once enjoyed. Despite the damage it causes, the narcissist continues to rewrite their own story because it is the only way they can preserve their sense of self. They cannot confront the reality of their own flaws or shortcomings, because to do so would shatter their fragile ego. The narcissist's identity is so intertwined with the need for validation and control that they cannot bear the thought of admitting defeat. To accept that they have lost someone powerful is to accept that they are not the omnipotent figure they believe themselves to be. It would require them to acknowledge their own vulnerability and the possibility that they are not invincible. This is a truth they simply cannot face. The distortion of reality also serves as a means of avoiding emotional pain. The narcissist fears emotions that expose their inner fragility, such as sadness, regret, or guilt. These emotions are threatening because they reveal the emptiness that exists beneath their grandiose exterior. By rewriting the narrative, the narcissist can maintain a sense of emotional distance from the loss. They avoid feeling the sting of rejection, the sense of inadequacy that comes with realizing that someone they considered a source of power and validation has chosen to leave. In the end, the narcissist's need to rewrite the narrative is a desperate attempt to maintain their sense of control over a world that is slipping out of their grasp. They cannot afford to face the truth because it would mean facing the destruction of the identity they have so carefully cultivated. So they twist and manipulate reality, telling themselves stories that allow them to avoid confronting the painful truth of their own defeat. But no matter how much they distort the facts, the underlying truth remains. The narcissist has lost someone powerful, and the illusion of control they so desperately cling to is beginning to unravel.